We don't just hand out cash to anyone, especially not amounts like this. The words came sharp and cold from Laura Simmons, the manager of Hamilton Trust's flagship branch in Midtown Chicago. Her voice carried across the lobby, drawing curious glances from nearby customers. She didn't whisper. She wanted others to hear. Behind the counter, she pushed back a withdrawal slip without even a polite smile. Denise Carter, a 62-year-old black woman dressed in a simple beige cardigan and black slacks, stood calmly across from her. Her posture remained straight. Dignified despite the growing humiliation, Denise had handed over her bank card, ID, and a withdrawal slip for $95. $. She had expected routine questions, perhaps a manager's approval. She did not expect the blatant hostility now radiating from behind the counter. Eric, the young male teller who had initially greeted her with forced politeness, now hovered nervously beside Laura. "We just need to verify the source of the funds," he added, glancing at Megan. The other teller, Megan, avoided Denise's eyes, pretending to reorganize deposit slips that needed no sorting. Laura folded her arms across her tailored blazer and leaned forward, lowering her voice just enough to suggest secrecy, yet loud enough for nearby customers to catch her tone. "People like you usually don't have this kind of cash just sitting in a personal account." The humiliation was public, deliberate, and strategic. Across the marble-floored lobby, a young mother paused mid-transaction, clutching her child's hand and whispering something while casting a wary glance toward Denise. An older man in a postal worker's uniform stiffened at the scene, a silent witness who recognized the pattern instantly. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a message. Denise remained composed. Her natural hair was styled neatly, makeup subtle. Nothing about her appearance screamed wealth, which seemed to be the problem. In this bank, in this moment, she wasn't a respected customer. She was an object of suspicion. "I've provided my ID and account details," Denise said firmly but calmly. "This withdrawal is within my account's daily limit." Laura offered a tight smile, the kind reserved for those considered troublesome. "Yes, but we have to be cautious. We've seen scams, lottery fraud, inheritance schemes, situations where older clients are manipulated. It's for your protection." Denise's lips pressed into a thin line. She had heard similar excuses before in less expensive stores, at restaurants, even at hotel lobbies, but never at her own bank. Not like this. Without asking, Laura signaled to Eric, who disappeared briefly and returned with Paul, the branch's young security guard. He looked uneasy, but positioned himself behind Laura, arms crossed. "Is there a problem?" Paul asked, scanning Denise as if expecting her to cause a scene. "No problem at all," Denise replied, standing her ground. "I'm requesting a withdrawal, nothing more." Laura tilted her head, adopting a tone that mimicked concern. "Denise Carter, is it? Mrs. Carter, $95. $95 is quite a large sum for, well, for someone with a checking account like yours. May I ask what the funds are for?" The question was not policy. It was prejudice wrapped in feigned professionalism. Moments earlier, Denise had watched a young white man in a designer suit withdraw $120. $90 without so much as a second glance from the staff. "My reasons are private," Denise answered firmly. "Unless you're asking all your clients that question today." Eric shifted uncomfortably. Megan bit her lip. Laura, however, pressed on. "If you can't explain the withdrawal, I'll have to deny the transaction. In fact," she straightened, signaling finality, "we might have to review the account entirely. There could be suspicious activity. Paul, can you stand by in case we need to ask Mrs. Carter to leave?" The message was clear. You don't belong here. Take your money somewhere else. Or better yet, don't take it at all. Denise exhaled slowly, steadying herself. She could feel the weight of the stares, the judgments. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every black customer, every senior client, every person who had been quietly dismissed, doubted, and degraded in places like this. She glanced upward at the security cameras. The little red light blinked steadily. Every word, every smirk, every moment of condescension was being recorded. Good. Reaching into her well-worn leather purse, she retrieved her phone. "Who are you calling?" Laura asked, eyes narrowing. "My office," Denise replied smoothly. "Since you seem unable to complete a routine withdrawal, perhaps someone with more authority can assist me." Eric's face paled. Megan's hands trembled slightly. Paul looked between Denise and Laura, uncertainty growing. Laura scoffed, mistaking Denise's calm for desperation. "You can call whoever you like, Mrs. Carter, but no one's overriding my decision today. If you don't leave, I'll be forced to escalate this to a formal ejection." The lobby grew quieter. Even the cash-counting machine seemed to hum more softly. Other customers had stopped pretending to mind their business. Denise pressed a single button on her phone and lifted it to her ear. "Yes," she said into the receiver, her voice steady and professional. "This is Denise Carter. I need you at the Midtown branch immediately." She paused. "And bring the board access credentials." Laura Simmons's expression hardened as she crossed her arms, projecting the cold authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Mrs. Carter, you are creating a disruption. I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises immediately. We reserve the right to refuse service if there's any indication of suspicious behavior." Her words echoed through the marble lobby. Heads turned. Customers who had previously pretended to mind their own business now openly watched the unfolding drama. Eric, the young teller, shifted his weight nervously. Megan, at the next window, lowered her eyes, busying herself with a stack of forms she had no real reason to touch. Denise Carter remained composed, standing tall despite the humiliation pressing down on her from every direction. "Requesting to withdraw my own money is not suspicious behavior," she replied evenly. "I have provided my ID and account details. There has been no disruption until your staff chose to create one." Laura gave a dismissive wave, as if swatting away both the truth and Denise's dignity. "That's your opinion. I'm following protocol." She turned and nodded at Paul. "The branch security guard, escort this customer out." Paul, a young man barely in his mid-20s, hesitated. His training manual had covered robbery attempts and emergency evacuations, not how to handle a situation where the person he was asked to remove seemed calm, reasonable, and entirely within her rights. "Ma'am," Paul began, his voice low and uncertain. "Perhaps if you could come back tomorrow, we can—" Laura cut him off sharply. "No delays. She needs to leave now." Denise glanced upward at the security cameras mounted in each corner of the ceiling. Their small red lights blinked steadily. Every second of this interaction, Laura's dismissiveness, Eric's discomfort, Megan's silence, and Paul's unease was being captured in high-definition video and audio, and that was only part of the record, hidden in her modest leather purse. Denise's phone continued to record, capturing not only the words but the tone, the hostility, and the unspoken assumptions that permeated every exchange. Behind Denise, an older gentleman in a postal worker's uniform watched with a weary expression. He had seen this script before, too many times, but never, he suspected, with the outcome he was about to witness. A younger customer, perhaps in his 30s, whispered to his wife nearby, "What's going on? Why are they treating her like that?" His wife shook her head, her face tight with concern. Laura, sensing the growing attention, leaned in toward Denise and lowered her voice, but not enough to prevent others from hearing. "If you want to avoid further embarrassment, I suggest you leave quietly. People who cause trouble here find their accounts closed permanently. The implication was clear. Denise wasn't just being denied service today. She was being threatened with the loss of her financial standing altogether. Paul stepped forward, his hand hovering near Denise's elbow, but not quite touching her. His hesitation was evident. He didn't want to become part of what felt increasingly wrong. "I won't be leaving," Denise stated firmly. "I am a customer, requesting a legitimate transaction. If there are concerns, you may verify my account, without discrimination, without assumptions, and without threats." Eric opened his mouth as if to speak, but Laura shot him a look that silenced whatever protest he might have voiced. "That's enough," Laura snapped. "Paul, please escort Mrs. Carter out before we have to call the police." The mention of the police caused a ripple through the crowd. Several customers exchanged glances. Some pulled out their phones. A few had already begun recording. Denise's calm did not waver. She simply lifted her phone slightly, enough to remind everyone, including Laura, that the recording had been underway from the moment things began to escalate. "You are, of course, aware," Denise said evenly, "that Hamilton Trust's customer policy allows documentation of any service interactions where the customer feels their rights are being violated." Laura's face tightened. She hadn't expected resistance backed by knowledge of corporate policies. She certainly hadn't expected a woman in modest clothes, a cardigan, slacks, and sensible shoes to speak with the precision and authority of a corporate attorney. Megan finally looked up, her face pale. She glanced from Laura to Denise, and then to the security cameras. Her expression revealed the dawning realization that this was no ordinary customer, and this was no ordinary situation. Paul lowered his hand, visibly uncomfortable now. He was caught between orders, and his growing sense that those orders were not only unjust, but potentially career-ending. At that moment, a man standing near the loan services desk stepped forward. "Excuse me?" he said, his voice loud enough for all to hear. "I arrived after this lady and I've completed my business already. Why exactly is she being treated like this?" Laura's eyes flashed with anger at the interruption. "Sir, this doesn't concern you. It concerns all of us," the man replied. "This isn't right." The tension in the lobby thickened. The bank's motto, "Serving with integrity and respect," was displayed prominently on the wall behind Laura. The hypocrisy of the situation was lost on no one. Laura straightened her blazer, doubling down. "Last chance. Mrs. Carter, leave, or I will have you forcibly removed and your account frozen pending an investigation." Denise didn't flinch. She pressed a button on her phone's speed dial. "Yes." She spoke calmly into the phone. "This is Denise Carter. I'm still at the Midtown branch. They've refused my transaction and are now threatening to call law enforcement." A brief pause. Then, deliberately, for Laura and everyone nearby to hear, "Please notify the board and activate the security oversight protocols." Laura paled for the first time. Paul stepped back instinctively. In the distance, the bank's elevator chimed. Change was coming. The elevator's soft chime barely cut through the heavy silence of the bank lobby, but for Denise Carter, it was as loud and sharp as a thunderclap announcing a storm. Laura Simmons' face stiffened as the elevator doors slid open. 3 people emerged, not customers, not lower-level employees, but figures whose presence immediately changed the atmosphere. At the front was Olivia Barnes, Senior Vice President of Operations at Hamilton Trust. She was flanked by Marcus Reed, Head of Compliance, and Evelyn Hart, one of the most influential members of the bank's board. All 3 wore the grave expressions of people summoned into a situation they had already determined was a crisis. As the trio crossed the marble floor, their heels clicking sharply, every staff member froze. Eric lowered his head. Megan stopped pretending to shuffle papers. Even Paul, the security guard, instinctively stepped back. Sensing that authority far above Laura Simmons had arrived, Olivia's eyes scanned the room. She took in the cluster of customers observing the scene. The staff members frozen in awkward positions. The security guard standing helplessly between conflicting orders. And finally, Denise Carter, calm, poised, her phone still in hand, recording. "Mrs. Carter," Olivia said, her voice firm but respectful. "We apologize for this delay. We are here to address the situation." Laura's mouth opened, her instincts compelling her to take control. "Ms. Barnes, But Olivia raised a hand, silencing her without a word. "Not now. Laura." Turning back to Denise, Olivia continued. "If you would accompany us to the executive conference room upstairs, we can resolve this matter privately and without further inconvenience." Denise's gaze did not waver. "No," she said, her voice even and unyielding. "What has transpired here was not private. The humiliation was public. The resolution will be as well." The lobby grew even quieter, as if the very air had been drawn out of the room. Olivia nodded slowly, understanding the weight of Denise's statement. She gestured toward Marcus, who pulled out a tablet already displaying footage from the lobby's security cameras. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "we've reviewed the initial footage. What you experienced is not just unacceptable, it is against every policy and principle this institution claims to uphold." Laura's eyes darted from the tablet to Olivia's face. "I was following protocol," she stammered, the confidence in her voice now replaced by something closer to desperation. "Large withdrawals require additional scrutiny." "That's correct," Marcus replied calmly. "And yet, 3 other withdrawals exceeding $50,000 occurred this morning without the same level of scrutiny. All by white customers. None were questioned about the source of their funds. None were asked to leave." Denise remained silent. She didn't need to speak. The facts were doing that for her. Olivia gestured again. Marcus tapped the tablet, projecting the footage onto the bank's large flat-screen monitor mounted above the service counter. On the screen, side-by-side clips played, a young white man withdrawing $60. Wowers, served within 3 minutes. No questions asked. An elderly white woman accessing $45. Wowers, staff smiling, offering her assistance to her car. A middle-aged white couple making a joint withdrawal of $75. $EOR, processed without hesitation. Then, the footage shifted. Denise Carter approaching the counter. Staff exchanging glances. Delays. Escalation. Laura's dismissive posture. The summoning of security. The attempt to eject her from the premises. The contrast was damning. A murmur rippled through the customers gathered nearby. They weren't just witnessing a misunderstanding anymore. They were witnessing undeniable evidence of discrimination. Olivia turned back to Denise. "Mrs. Carter, I must also inform you that the executive team has been monitoring this situation remotely since your initial call." At that moment, the front doors opened again. This time, a delegation of Hamilton Trust's top executives entered the lobby, including Thomas Gallagher, the CEO of the entire corporation. The weight of the moment was now undeniable. Gallagher, a tall man in his late 60s with silver hair and a reputation for decisive action, approached Denise directly. He did not pause at the counter. He did not address Laura or the staff. His focus was solely on the woman who had been so gravely wronged. "Mrs. Carter," he began, his voice carrying the deep timbre of both authority and remorse. "I am deeply sorry, I assure you. What occurred here today does not reflect the values of Hamilton Trust or the standards we demand of our staff." Denise nodded once, but did not reply. She waited. Gallagher continued. "What I must also tell you, and what everyone in this room should understand, is that you are not just a valued customer." He paused, You are a member of our corporate board, and as of this quarter, following your recent investment, you are also the largest private shareholder in Hamilton Trust. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Laura's knees seemed to buckle slightly. Eric's face drained of color. Megan covered her mouth with both hands. Paul, the young security guard, looked as though he might faint. Denise Carter had not simply been an older black woman requesting a withdrawal, she had been their employer's employer, their highest-ranking private stakeholder, and they had tried to throw her out. The weight of that realization struck Laura Simmons first. She took a shaky step forward, her voice cracking. "Mrs. Carter, I had no idea. If I had known—" Denise's gaze cut through her apology like a blade. "That's precisely the problem. Miss Simmons, you believe respect is owed only to those you recognize as powerful, not to every customer, not to every human being." Gallagher nodded in agreement. "Which is why," he announced, turning to face the gathering crowd, "this incident will not be resolved with mere apologies." He gestured toward Marcus, who handed Denise a formal document already signed and prepared. "This is a formal declaration of full cooperation with an independent investigation into discriminatory practices at this branch. The findings will not be buried. They will be addressed transparently." Denise accepted the document without a word. Gallagher turned toward Laura and the staff behind her. "Effective immediately. Laura Simmons is suspended pending the outcome of the investigation." Laura opened her mouth to protest, but Gallagher wasn't finished. "Eric and Megan," he continued, "while your conduct did not escalate the situation, your failure to intervene cannot be ignored. You will be placed on administrative leave. Paul, your hesitation to forcibly remove Mrs. S. Carter, while commendable, places you in a difficult position. You are temporarily reassigned pending review." The young security guard nodded, visibly relieved not to be dismissed outright. The consequences were swift and public, and they were not over. Denise finally spoke again. "Mr. Gallagher, while I appreciate the immediate actions, there's more at stake here than personnel changes." She turned slightly, addressing the room, not just the executives, but the customers, the staff, and the community represented within the walls of Hamilton Trust. "What happened to me is not an isolated incident. It is a symptom of a culture that allows bias and discrimination to fester behind the shield of protocol. Today, it happened to someone with the means and position to fight back, but how many others left this branch, left this institution entirely, silently taking their business elsewhere because they knew no one would listen?" Her words resonated deeply. Even customers who had only come for routine banking now stood transfixed, aware that they were witnessing something far more significant than a single transaction dispute. Gallagher nodded solemnly, "Which is why, effective immediately, I am authorizing a comprehensive audit of all Hamilton Trust branches. We will examine customer treatment patterns, approval disparities, and staff conduct, and we will not wait for regulators to tell us where we've failed." Denise held his gaze. "Good, because real accountability requires transparency, and it requires change, not just policy change, but cultural change." Olivia Barnes stepped forward, adding, "Mrs. Carter, with your permission, we would also like you to co-chair the new Equity and Customer Experience Council we are forming, not as a figurehead, but as a decision-maker." Denise paused for a long moment. Finally, she nodded. "On one condition, that council will include not only executives, but frontline staff and community representatives. We will hear from the people who experience these policies every day." "Agreed," Gallagher confirmed. A ripple of applause began, not from the executives, but from customers gathered around the lobby. It was not loud, not celebratory. It was the solemn acknowledgement of justice taking root. As the applause faded, Gallagher addressed the crowd once more. "To those customers who witnessed today's events, We thank you for your patience and your understanding. If you have experienced or observed similar issues, we encourage you to share them. Change begins with honesty. The executives turned back to Denise. Mrs. Carter, Gallagher said, may we proceed upstairs now to finalize the documentation? Denise shook her head gently. Not yet. She looked around the lobby once more. First, I want to thank the customers and staff members who recognized that what was happening was wrong, even if they felt powerless to stop it. Change starts when people stop looking away. Her eyes met Paul's. The young security guard nodded silently, gratitude and understanding passing between them. Finally, Denise took a steadying breath. Now, she said, we can go upstairs. As she walked toward the elevators, this time not as a dismissed customer, but as the most powerful stakeholder in the room, the crowd parted respectfully, and the lobby of Hamilton Trust's Midtown branch would never feel the same again. As the elevator doors slid shut behind Denise Carter and the senior leadership team, the lobby remained wrapped in a heavy, expectant silence. Yet within seconds, the doors reopened, not to retreat from the public eye, but because Denise had insisted that final accountability would be delivered not in a boardroom, but here, where the injustice had occurred and where the community had witnessed it. The executives re-entered the lobby, followed now by members of the bank's legal department and the director of human resources. Every customer and employee sensed that the moment had arrived where actions would speak louder than apologies. Denise stepped forward first, her calm presence commanding the room. Though the power she wielded was undeniable, her tone remained measured and resolute. Before we proceed with policy changes or audits, she said, we must address the individuals responsible for today's events, not quietly, not behind closed doors, but transparently. Because this wasn't just a lapse in judgment, this was a breach of trust, and trust must be restored publicly. Thomas Gallagher, the CEO, stood beside her. He nodded solemnly before turning to Laura Simmons, who had shrunk visibly in stature since the revelation of Denise's identity. Gone was the woman who had exuded control and superiority. In her place stood someone desperate, frightened, and grasping at a fading sense of authority. Laura Simmons, Gallagher began, his voice unwavering. Your conduct today, and in prior instances as revealed by our preliminary investigation, has demonstrated a consistent failure to uphold the values and standards of Hamilton Trust. Effective immediately. Your employment is terminated. Laura's eyes widened. She shook her head slowly, as though disbelief might somehow undo the reality confronting her. Please, she whispered hoarsely. This was a misunderstanding. I followed procedure. I didn't know who she was. Denise responded before Gallagher could. That's precisely the problem. Miss Simmons, respect should not depend on recognition. Protocol should not serve as a shield for prejudice. You didn't fail because you didn't know who I was. You failed because you didn't care who I was. And by extension, you didn't care who any of your customers were, unless they looked the way you expected them to. A quiet murmur passed through the crowd, a mixture of agreement and somber reflection. Laura looked toward Eric and Megan, as if seeking silent allies, but both tellers stood apart now, their faces pale and drawn. Eric Walker, Gallagher continued, turning to the young male teller. While you did not initiate the mistreatment, you failed to intervene and actively contributed to the escalation. You were not simply a bystander, effective immediately. Your employment is also terminated. Eric's shoulders sagged. I was following my manager's lead. I thought... You thought wrong. Denise interrupted gently but firmly. Following poor leadership does not absolve you of personal responsibility. Integrity requires courage, especially when it's difficult. You lacked both. Tears welled in Eric's eyes, but he did not protest further. Gallagher's attention shifted to Megan. Megan Torres, while your role was less direct, your failure to speak up when you knew this treatment was wrong cannot be overlooked. However, he paused. Given that our review showed clear signs of discomfort and hesitation on your part, and that you took no active role in escalating the situation, you will not be terminated. Instead, you are placed on probation, subject to mandatory retraining and an evaluation period. Megan nodded rapidly. Her face streaked with silent tears. Relief mingled with guilt in her expression. She mouthed, "Thank you." Though it was unclear whether the words were directed to Gallagher or to Denise, Paul, the security guard, stood rigid before Gallagher could speak. Denise raised a hand. "Mr. Gallagher, if I may." Gallagher stepped aside. "Paul Reynolds." Denise addressed him directly, her voice softening. "You were given conflicting instructions today, yet when ordered to remove me, you hesitated, not out of defiance, but because something inside you knew what was happening was wrong. That instinct deserves recognition." Paul's posture remained tense, but his eyes met Denise's with a mixture of fear and hope. "You will not face disciplinary action," Denise declared. "Instead, you will receive additional training, and I expect you to become a model of equitable service moving forward. Leadership is not about blind obedience. It's about doing what's right when the rules are unclear." Paul exhaled deeply, the weight of potential job loss lifting from his shoulders. He nodded with profound gratitude. The customers who had remained in the lobby, some still clutching their phones, bore witness to these decisions. They saw not only the fall of those who had failed, but also the preservation of those who showed the capacity for growth. Denise turned back to the wider audience. "Let this be clear to everyone, employees, customers, board members. Accountability is not about punishment alone. It's about acknowledging harm, correcting course, and building a foundation where such harm cannot so easily take root again." Gallagher gestured toward two human resources representatives, who stepped forward. "Ms. Simmons, Mr. Walker, you will collect your personal belongings under supervision and exit the premises immediately." Laura's final attempt at resistance crumbled. She gathered her bag and followed the HR staff toward the employee area. Shoulders hunched in defeat, Eric followed silently, tears now freely falling. Megan remained at her station, receiving quiet reassurances from a senior HR manager. As the terminated employees exited, Denise addressed the remaining staff. "This should not be a moment of fear, but of reflection. Culture is shaped not just by rules, but by the behaviors we reward and the injustices we tolerate. Today marks a turning point. Those who align with fairness and respect will have our full support. Those who cling to outdated prejudices will find no place here." A smattering of applause rose, hesitant at first, then growing as employees and customers alike acknowledged the courage it took to confront these issues head-on. Gallagher waited for the applause to subside before continuing. "Hamilton Trust will not simply move on from this incident. We will learn from it. An external review of all branch operations will begin immediately. Bias training will become a core requirement, not a checkbox exercise. And most importantly, we will elevate voices like Mrs. Carter's, not just because of her position or investment, but because every customer's experience matters." Denise nodded in approval. "Change is not a speech or a memo. It is action, visible, measurable, and accountable. And it starts today." She glanced around the lobby, her gaze meeting the eyes of customers and employees alike. "I want every person who enters Hamilton Trust, from a college student opening their first savings account to a retiree managing their life's work, to know they will be treated with dignity, not because they might one day hold power or wealth, but because dignity is owed to all." The staff listened in rapt attention. Many nodded. Some wiped away tears. A few looked ashamed. Perhaps reflecting on times they had remained silent when they should have spoken up, Gallagher concluded, "This institution will not be remembered for today's failure, but for how we respond to it, and we will respond by building a stronger, fairer Hamilton trust." With that, Denise took a final look around the room, where once she had stood alone, surrounded by suspicion and hostility. She now stood with the backing of leadership, staff willing to learn, and a community that had seen both the problem and the beginning of the solution. As Laura Simmons and Eric Walker exited the branch, escorted not by security, but by the consequences of their own actions, the lobby seemed to breathe easier, as if the weight of old injustices had begun to lift. And Denise Carter, once humiliated in this very room, now led not from a place of vengeance, but from the conviction that true leadership demanded accountability and the promise of a better path forward. In the days that followed, the Midtown branch of Hamilton Trust underwent not just a leadership change, but a cultural reckoning. Denise Carter, no longer merely a shareholder or board member, but now the most visible advocate for equity in the institution, led the charge. Her presence was not limited to a single incident. She made it clear that systemic problems required systemic solutions. The first public announcement came from Thomas Gallagher himself, standing beside Denise at a press conference streamed across regional and national media. He introduced the Hamilton Equity Banking Initiative. "This is not a reactionary measure," Gallagher declared. "It is a permanent shift in how we evaluate success. Moving forward, employee bonuses, promotions, and branch evaluations will not be based solely on profitability, but equally on customer service equity metrics." Denise stepped forward to outline the next steps. "We will invest $25 million in the first phase. This includes comprehensive bias and cultural competency training for all staff, from tellers to executives. More importantly, we are forming the Customer Equity Advisory Council, composed not only of senior leadership, but also frontline employees and, crucially, customers who have experienced marginalization." The press conference resonated far beyond the walls of the bank. Civil rights organizations praised the proactive approach. Financial news outlets noted that Hamilton Trust was not simply performing damage control, but was setting a new industry standard. Yet, Denise knew that speeches and press releases were not enough. Real change happened at ground level. 1 week later, she scheduled an unannounced visit to the Hamilton Trust branch in South Shore, a neighborhood with a diverse population and a history of financial institutions either neglecting or predating upon its residents. Unlike her previous visit to Midtown, Denise did not wear modest clothing. She wore what she would on a typical business day: a navy blazer, tailored slacks, and a simple gold pendant her late husband had given her years ago. She carried no purse this time, only a tablet containing the latest customer service reports. When she entered the branch, she immediately noticed a change in atmosphere. Staff members greeted every customer with sincerity. No dismissive glances, no assumptions based on appearance. Posters promoting the new equity initiative were prominently displayed. At the teller line, a young black woman named Jasmine smiled warmly. "Good morning. How can I assist you today?" Denise smiled back. "Actually, I'm here to observe." The branch manager, Luis Ramirez, approached quickly but without panic. He recognized Denise instantly and extended his hand. "Mrs. Carter, it's an honor. We've heard about your efforts, and we've already begun implementing the new protocols." Denise spent the next hour observing transactions. She watched how staff interacted with a retired teacher cashing a pension check, a young Hispanic entrepreneur opening his first business account, and an elderly Korean couple finalizing a home equity loan. Each interaction was respectful, patient, and, most importantly, consistent. No customer was treated with less priority or more suspicion based on their clothing, accent, or background. After completing her review, Denise gathered the staff in the small community room at the back of the branch. "I want to thank each of you," she began. "What I witnessed here today reflects the culture we aspire to across Hamilton Trust. Fairness isn't just about avoiding mistakes, it's about making every customer feel valued." "Every time," Luis nodded. "We've embraced the new accountability measures. Our staff meetings now include reviews of equity metrics. We share positive stories and discuss where we can improve. It's not always comfortable, but it's necessary," Jasmine added. "We've also started encouraging customers to give direct feedback. Some were hesitant at first, but now they tell us when things feel right and when they don't." Denise was impressed. "That feedback loop is vital. The voices of our customers must guide our progress." Before she left, an elderly black gentleman named Mr. Watkins approached. "Mrs. Carter, I've banked with Hamilton Trust for over 40 years. I was ready to close my account after what I heard happened downtown. But now, seeing these changes, I think I'll stay." Denise smiled warmly. "Thank you, Mr. Watkins. And if you ever feel your experience isn't what it should be, here's my direct office line." She handed him a business card. By the time Denise returned to headquarters, the results from the first round of equity audits were arriving. Preliminary data showed improved customer satisfaction across several branches. More importantly, disparities in service times and account approvals were already beginning to narrow. Gallagher met her at the executive conference room. "The board is fully backing the next phase," he said. "The cultural shift is becoming measurable." Denise nodded. "Good. But we will not let this become a moment we simply pat ourselves on the back for. The real measure of success is what happens when no one thinks they're being watched." And so, Hamilton Trust pressed forward, not to erase the mistakes of the past, but to ensure they would not define the future. 6 months later, Denise Carter once again stood at a podium, this time at Hamilton Trust's annual shareholders meeting. But the room was filled with more than just investors. Frontline employees, community leaders, civil rights advocates, and customers from every background gathered in a show of solidarity and curiosity. They weren't here simply to hear about profits. They came to hear how the institution had changed and where it was heading. Behind Denise, a large screen displayed the new Hamilton Trust mission statement. The words were simple but powerful: fairness, integrity, accountability for everyone. "I stand before you today," Denise began, her voice steady, "not to recount the shameful incident that occurred at our Midtown branch, but to share what came after. We didn't just change policies, we changed priorities. We didn't just correct mistakes, we created mechanisms to prevent them." She paused, letting the weight of that truth settle in the room. "In the past 6 months, we've implemented equity audits across all branches. We've revised hiring practices, ensuring our workforce better reflects the communities we serve. We've launched customer advisory councils, bringing the voices of those often unheard directly into our decision-making, and we've tied leadership bonuses to both profitability and equitable service metrics." The audience listened intently. These were not hollow promises. They were tangible, measurable actions, Denise continued. "Most importantly, we've cultivated a culture where employees feel empowered to speak up, not just when something goes wrong, but to suggest improvements, share concerns, and advocate for the customers who trust us with their financial well-being." A soft murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. "I've visited over a dozen branches personally. I've listened to customers who once felt invisible tell me they now feel valued. I've seen employees who once feared retribution for speaking out now lead training sessions for their peers. And just last month, our South Shore branch, once struggling with customer retention, was recognized for the highest community engagement score in the region." She smiled then, a genuine expression of pride, not just in the institution, but in the people who had made change possible. "But let me be clear," she said. her tone turning serious. This journey is ongoing. Culture is not changed by a press release or a one-time training session. It is changed by daily actions, by leaders who listen, by employees who care, and by customers who hold us accountable. Denise looked across the room, making deliberate eye contact with individuals of every age and background. What happened to me could have happened to anyone, and that's exactly why I chose not to walk away quietly. Discrimination thrives in silence. It crumbles under the weight of exposure and accountability. She paused, then added, to those who have ever felt dismissed, doubted, or degraded, whether in a bank, a workplace, or any corner of society, I say this: your dignity is not determined by others' perceptions, and when you choose to stand firm, you create ripples that can change entire systems. A standing ovation began, not the polite kind, but the type fueled by genuine respect and deep emotion. Investors, staff, community members, customers, all rose to their feet, applauding not only Denise Carter's personal resilience, but the collective journey Hamilton Trust had undertaken. As the applause subsided, Denise offered one final thought. Leadership is not about position or title. It's about the responsibility to create spaces where fairness is the standard, not the exception. That is what we will continue to build here, together. And with that, she stepped away from the podium, not just as a symbol of change, but as the architect of a new era,